We are the Childhood Collective, and we have helped thousands of overwhelmed parents find joy and confidence in raising their child with ADHD. I'm Katie, a speech language pathologist.
And I'm Lori.
And I'm Mallory, and we're both child psychologists. We combine the science of ADHD with the compassion of moms and bring you practical tools you can start using today.
So hit subscribe and let's help your family shine with ADHD. I'm here today with Mallory and Katie. Today we're answering one of our most frequently asked questions: how can I get my child with ADHD to listen? To be honest, okay, I'm starting over, sorry.
It's fine.
I'm here today with Mallory and Katie. Today we're answering one of our most frequently asked questions: how can I get my ADHD child to listen? To be honest, I'm just here for the advice today because I've also really been struggling with this with my own kids, especially this summer.
Oh, same. I think all of us struggle with getting our kids to listen.
Hold on. When you said this summer, this might not be for
Oh, yeah.
Okay, hang on. Then we should start over.
Sorry. I'm thinking it's going to be once school's back on, and so it might feel weird.
Yeah.
No worries.
Okay, guys, think it's September. We're in school.
Or October even.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I'm here today with Mallory and Katie. Today we're answering one of our most frequently asked questions: how can I get my child with ADHD to listen? To be honest, I'm just here for the advice today because I've also really been struggling with this with my own kids.
Same. I think all of us struggle with getting our kids to listen.
For
Yes.
sure. And if you feel like you're having a really hard time getting your kids to listen and cooperate, you're obviously not alone. Kids with ADHD really struggle to regulate their attention, shift their focus when they need to, listen to the directions that are being given to them, and actually follow through on those directions. And this is not because they're naughty or bad. It's really about how their brain is working and growing. And even if your child is looking right at you, and maybe you guys can relate, even when your child's looking right at you, their mind might be somewhere completely else, somewhere completely different. So you're speaking, you think they're listening, but maybe they're not.
Yeah. Like on the Minecraft house that they're building, which my kids don't actually play Minecraft, but every patient that comes in my office is playing Minecraft right now. So that's, a lot of times I'll be talking to them during testing and they are totally thinking about their Minecraft house.
For sure.
Absolutely. And I do it too. I'm thinking about my own stuff. When you guys are talking, half the time I'm like over here making a mental grocery list and all the things.
Good to know you're not listening to us, Katie.
It's okay. It's okay. We have an outline to keep us on track. So don't worry. Yes. So a lot of kids are struggling to listen. And what that really results in is then as parents, we find ourselves giving tons of commands, repeating ourselves louder and louder. So we're raising our voices, sometimes to the point that we're actually yelling just to get them to listen.
Yep. And it's really this kind of vicious negative cycle, like the snowball effect that keeps getting bigger and bigger. We keep making these requests, they keep not listening, and then everyone ends up frustrated. And actually, we have research that's found that kids with challenging behavior are given commands or directions at double the rate of their neurotypical peers. And the numbers show that kids with the challenging behavior are getting about 40 commands in just 30 minutes compared to—
That is so many commands.
It is, compared to their peers who are getting just 17, so less than half of that. So it's just, if you think about that, 40 and 30 minutes, they're just constantly being told what to do, how to do it.
Yeah, that's more than one command a minute. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's overwhelming.
And also, when we're saying command, we're not just referring to military statements like "go to your room" or "give me 20," right? A command it's anytime we give our child an instruction or direction, and we could do that in kind of a militant or mean way, and we can do that in a positive way. Really, the best commands are ones that are calm, polite, positive, respectful of our kids. So something more like, please put your dish in the sink, right?
Absolutely. And thinking back to how these kids with more challenging behavior are getting more commands, the challenging piece here is that the more commands that we give kids actually result in even more challenging behavior. And this is because when kids are getting 40 commands in just 30 minutes, there's no way that the grown-ups that are giving these commands are able to follow through on all 40 of those things. And our kids are left with a really confusing message. Like, is it important for me to listen and cooperate or not? Because sometimes you follow through, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you tell me 20 times before I actually have to put my dish in the sink. So they're given this confusing message about whether commands and instructions are actually really important to listen to. And so they start tuning them out and they don't know what really is expected of them. And so all of these commands and these corrections just increase frustration for everyone, and they can lead to kind of what looks like defiance.
Yes, it's so frustrating for everybody involved. So, today we're going to give you 4 tips to really help our kids with ADHD to listen and follow through when we give them a quote command. Okay. And spoiler alert, it's going to be less about your child's behavior and more about strategies to help you understand how your child's brain is working. And from there, you can change the way that you're communicating. And this really impacts how kids respond to us.
Absolutely. So, our first tip is one that I really try to be conscious of. I don't get it right 100% of the time. I'd be happy if I got it right 50% of the time, probably. But our first tip is to give your command in a way that's stated positively. And what we mean by this is you want to focus on what you want your child to do versus what you don't want them to do. So a negatively stated command would be something like stop jumping on the bed. You're
Mm-hmm.
telling your child what you don't want them to do. A positively stated command would be please put your feet on the floor. You're stating it positively. You're telling them exactly what you want them to do. So another example would be like, don't hit your brother, versus a positively stated command would be, please keep your body to yourself, or please keep your hands to yourself. So when we state a command positively for our kids, we are kind of taking the guesswork out of what we expect of them. When we tell them what we don't want them to do, we leave them to kind of fill in the blanks about what we're really expecting of them. So if we say, like the example I gave, if we say, stop jumping on the bed, so then they start skipping on the bed, or they start doing like, like a trampoline, like seat drops on the bed. They're not necessarily jumping on the bed, but they're,
Right.
whatever. When we state it positively, we're taking the guesswork out of what we really want from them. And this is fair to them because we're making it very clear exactly what we want. And it just feels better as a parent to say like, oh, keep your body to yourself, versus like when we're stating something negatively, I feel like automatically it's like I'm angry, like don't hit your brother, versus when
Yes.
I'm saying like please keep your body to yourself, like it's just a lot easier to say that nicely. I
I think
think.
that's so interesting because I actually have a memory. It was probably like, I don't know, 16 or 17 years ago when I was in my very first job working with kids. And my supervisor told me that. She's like, we need to flip all of our instructions into the stating the positive outcome that you want. And it really blew my mind. And I'm not picking on my parents, okay? But I think a lot of us grew up in a generation where it was a litmus, like a list of don't do this, don't touch that, stop doing this. And so obviously then as an adult I learned that that's how you communicate, and so it's very natural to tell someone what you don't want them to
Yes.
do.
Yep.
It's so hard to flip it, but it really blew my mind because I realized, wow, that's so much more effective because we
Mhm.
basically made it into one step instead of two. Because if we say don't jump on the bed, now kids have to translate that to don't do this, instead do this
Yeah.
other
So
thing,
they're the
right?
ones that have to do the translating. So we're
Yes.
saying it's hard for us to flip it just because of the way we were raised. But now, when we state it negatively, we're putting the onus on our child to be the one to flip it. Let's not do that. Let's
Right.
do that. It takes practice, but
And from
yeah.
an adult perspective, like thinking of my relationship, if my husband was constantly telling me what he didn't like for me to do, that would be really defeating. And so I'd
Mhm.
much rather have him tell me, like, I really love it when you text me when I'm at work. I really wish
Yeah.
he would say that, by the way. He does not say
Yeah.
that. But I really wish he would say that to me. And it would be so reinforcing to me to hear what he does want, right?
Yeah.
We all kind of want to hear what we're doing
Yeah.
well and what else we can do well in our relationships. So thinking of that for our kids, I can really see how that that connects.
Yeah, and I think what you said before is it isn't natural for us to do that.
Mhm.
And when I used to train teachers in the schools, we would talk about that. It's really natural in a class of 30 kids, or at home, to, when something goes wrong, sort of point that out, right? And to correct what they're doing wrong. That's what comes out of our mouth, because that is what we're seeing. So these things that we're talking about just aren't natural, and it does take effort to change the way we talk to our kids and be slower in processing and responding to them too.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point too when you're thinking about raising kids with ADHD that are struggling with executive functioning. They might have the slower processing of the direction that you're giving them. So if you're stating it negatively, and again, they're the ones that have to make the jump of what you really want from them,
Mhm.
it's going to take a while for them to kind of go through the whole sequence of stop doing that, do this instead, and then actually cooperate with what you want them to do. So we want to take the guesswork out of it. We want to state it positively. It feels better. Of course, you're delivering it in a firm tone, like this is what you mean, but you can deliver it calmly and positively. And so that's our first tip. State your command positively to increase the likelihood that your child's going to be able to listen.
I love it. And that calm tone is a challenge for all of us. And I think that as parents, we don't always realize what we actually sound like. And so being conscious of that and just being aware, like I know I might be distracted when my kids are talking to me. And then my response, my tone that I use to respond can come off really snarky. And it can really change the way that the whole interaction goes when we are conscious of using a little bit of a calmer voice. And that doesn't mean you're saying, "Hey, little buddy, can you please get off the bed?" No, okay, that's not what we're talking about. My husband will make fun of me when I tell him, like, "Oh, we need to use a calm voice." And that's what he goes to. But really, no, we're using an appropriate voice, right? But we're exactly like Mal said, "Hey, it's time to get off the bed." And so we're using a calm voice. There's not judgment or anger or condescension in there, right? Maybe in your mind, but you're not going to say it like that. You're going to use a calm voice because that's going to increase the relationship and the cooperation piece.
Yeah.
Yep.
My daughter, just last night, she was like, "Mom, you're yelling at me," which I often hear. I'm sure many people can relate when
Oh
you
my
feel like,
gosh.
no, I'm not. I'm not yelling. And I look at
All the
my
time.
husband. I look at my husband and I'm like, "Am I yelling?" And he's like, "Well, you're not yelling, but you're clearly irritated and frustrated, and they can see that." And it was helpful for that feedback, because sometimes, like, you don't think that you're being that way. But I have a daughter who's very sensitive, and if she feels like I'm raising her voice even a little bit, is very sensitive to that perceived criticism, or that criticism through my voice and through my tone. And so many of our kids with ADHD really are
Yes.
so sensitive to criticism,
Mhm.
which is why that can trigger those big emotions sometimes, because they're so sensitive. So it really is an important thing to think about. And even we were saying, like, before we got on here, like, recording yourself when you're giving instructions and listening to it, because sometimes we really don't know what we sound like, right?
So true. Yes, it's so hard. And this is something too, like we really want to be clear, we're not coming in here saying like we have this figured out and we're going to tell you how we do it every time, right? If you
No.
were in any of our houses, as Lori just gave that example, we all say the negative thing or use kind of a frustrated tone sometimes. This is kind of like we're thinking here in the best case scenario what we all strive to be like. So there's no judgment for those of us that are listening going like, "Oops, that's really a lot of things you're asking from me." We just want to be clear, like this is really hard for all of us as parents.
Yes.
So my tip that I'm going to share is actually kind of related to speech therapy, and it has to do with the way that kids process language. And a strategy that we can use as parents, and I'm actually really working on this one with my own kids, because for me, I have to do it differently for each of my kids because they have different language levels. So, a strategy is to keep your commands really concise and giving just one part or one step at a time. And this is because kids with ADHD, they can have limited working memory. They can also have a lot of language processing difficulties. So it's really tempting, especially in a rush. I find myself when I'm hurried doing this more like, okay, go to your room, grab your shoes, grab your socks, come out here. We're going to do sunscreen. Then we have to take your vitamins. And I'm listing off, 5 or 6 steps at a time. And again, I have one kid who can probably hang with, 3, 4 steps, but one who really needs things broken down. And so that's another strategy, is to give your kids one piece at a time. And I think this is really tricky as parents, but also keeping in mind that as we practice, it's going to become easier to break things down and not feel like you have to tell them the entire story of what their morning is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think another piece here, another benefit for kids with ADHD is that when we do give it one step at a time, we kind of have that natural place to pause and celebrate the cooperation that just happened. I don't know about you, but like if I make a to-do list, sometimes I put something that I already did that day just so I could cross it off and like, that felt good.
Yes.
I've already done that. And you like get that reinforcement from like accomplishing something.
Yes.
So when we break it down into 4 steps instead of just 4 things all together at the end, we also get the opportunity for like, all right, high five, you brushed your teeth. Now let's put shoes on. So you kind of get the opportunity to connect more and reinforce really each step of what you're hoping your kid eventually does.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thinking about the morning routine, really the ideal scenario isn't us telling them each step what to do, right? Ideally, we're using a lot more like problem solving and, okay, looks like we're ready for the next thing. What comes next, right? But there's a lot of times throughout the day, apparently 40 times in 30 minutes, where we are giving commands. So don't get too stuck on the idea of like, I thought we weren't supposed to give a lot of commands. This is more like when you do give commands, this is a strategy that you can use to help make it more effective.
Yeah.
And I think another benefit of giving one step at a time is one piece of it. But when we say keep your commands concise, we also mean like keep your language as simple as possible. It's really easy for me, at least, to fall into like the over justification of why I'm asking you to do what I'm asking you to do.
Yes.
All the reasons like, come on, I need you to put on your pajamas. It's already late. I let you watch an extra show. If you still want a book, you got to put on your pajamas right now. And now I've just like said 5 sentences when really what I want my kid to do is put their pajamas on.
Yep.
So we need to keep it concise too, so that what we're actually asking our child to do doesn't get lost in the noise of our emotions and our rationalization of why we're asking them to do what we want them to do.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit like you were at bedtime 2 nights ago at my house, Mel, because I feel like I literally was like begging my kids to get their pajamas on. I'm like, we got to go out to dinner at your favorite restaurant. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yes. Keeping it concise is very important. I love it.
Yeah, I think we all struggle with that from time to time, or all the time. So our third tip for you today is really to think about your child's developmental level when you're giving those commands. And again, we just sort of talked about that in the sense that giving multiple instructions at one time just is going to be really hard a lot of times for kids with ADHD. But we've talked about this so many times in our podcast, the 1/3 rule for kids with their executive functioning abilities. And so again, if you have a 10-year-old, they might be functioning more like a 7-year-old or even a 6-year-old in their ability to follow directions and their ability to listen and focus. Again, think about your child when they were 3 years old. You'd have a different expectation of them in the morning. Like you wouldn't expect them to be able to go through all of those things in the morning routine without you helping in some capacity or giving assistance in different ways. So really thinking about what is my child's ability and how do I meet them where they're at. If you want more information, we have an entire free guide, The 6 Keys to Parenting ADHD and Having a Happy and Independent Child with ADHD. So you can check that out in the show notes where we go into a little bit more depth to help you understand that aspect of ADHD and also give you tips too related to what we're talking about today. But I want you to think about, we have lots of listeners with young kids who are 4 or 5 years old. And so if we're giving them more than one instruction, that's just not going to be developmentally appropriate. So if you have a young child, they definitely just need one short instruction with just a few words to be able to understand that, or even visuals that you can point to show them what is coming next can be really helpful too.
Absolutely. I think it's, in all of our interactions with our kids, it's really important to keep in mind the developmental level and our expectations matched with their current skill level. And again, we say this a lot, but sometimes we find ourselves in a place of real frustration when we feel like our kid isn't doing what we want them to do. And again, it's not because they're naughty, it's not because they want to frustrate us. It really does come back to the developmental level. And so it's so important to consider that when we're making requests of our kids. Is this something that my child is actually able to follow through on? And sometimes it's not necessarily about, does my kid have the skill to brush their teeth, put on their shoes, find their backpack? A lot of times they have that skill, that like hard skill that we can like feels really tangible, but the skill that's missing is again the working memory, being able to remember to do those three
Yeah.
things. So just, remembering that sometimes the skill that's missing is not necessarily like a hard skill that we can see and measure. Sometimes it's more related to, and a lot of times it's more related to executive functioning.
Yeah. And I think
Harder to quantify that.
it's just harder for the older kids, I think, because we see this with teachers too, where kids get into middle school years where they're like, you are expected to do these things. And now I feel like you're just unmotivated, you're lazy. And we start placing these kind of labels on kids when we're not thinking about when a child is 13, they could be functioning in their executive functioning at an age of 7, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as our kids get older, we really do have to think about what are we expecting of them? What can they do successfully? Is that one step? Is that two steps? Um, so that they can be successful in those, following through on those commands.
Absolutely. So for our final tip, this is one that I'm definitely guilty of, is before giving your child a command or a direction, making sure that you have their attention and they actually hear what you're saying. So I definitely am guilty of like the drive-by command. I'm like running past their room. Oh, put all your, make your bed, but I'm not there to
Right.
see if they actually follow through. Or I'm really guilty of being downstairs and hollering upstairs to telling
Mm-hmm.
them what to do. And again, I'm not there then to see if they're actually cooperating with what I asked them to do or follow through. They maybe don't hear me in the first place because I'm not there to check for understanding and see if they heard me. So it's really important that before giving a command, you make sure you have your child's attention. Sometimes that involves like getting down on their level, physical touch, touching them on the shoulder, looking at them in the eyes if they're comfortable with that. Sometimes parents in our comments all the time saying that a strategy that works really well for them is having their child repeat back to them the direction they've just given. So you can tell your child what to do. Then you can check for understanding by asking them to say it back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Another important piece here is like when you know you're about to need your child's cooperation and you're going to be asking them to do several things, limiting distractions in their environment as much as possible. Turning off the TV, getting them away from, that marble tower that they were just building that they still want to add pieces to. So limiting distractions and making sure you have their attention before you're giving a command whenever possible is going to increase the likelihood that they're going to listen and cooperate.
Yeah,
I feel like
screens are the biggest thing that I see with families where they're like, a lot of families might just have a screen on all the time. I grew up in a house that was like that, where like the TV is always on, or maybe you have lots of kids and somebody's always watching something, and that is like such a huge distraction for so many kids.
definitely. In my house, I have, I think, my own set of sensory issues because if the TV is blasting, it's like too much for me. And so when I'm going to go give my kids, in this case, like a command, or we're going to transition, I've learned now to say, we need to pause the TV. And I will
Yeah.
wait until they have
Yeah.
paused the TV, because I used to do that. I would walk out there and I would just start talking, and our TV is kind of like in the middle of our house. It's in our living room, which I love most of the time. But I would just be talking, hey guys, we're going to put away the laundry. I need everyone to grab their basket, and nobody's listening. And then that's when you start repeating it and getting a little bit feisty and kind of like that edge, like, guys, come on. And so by just waiting and saying, okay, please pause the TV, and just waiting until it's paused, that makes a huge difference. And I think something to keep in mind as you're learning to do these things, as you're trying them out, give it a little bit of time. Okay, because the first few times that I did please pause the TV, it took a very long time for them to pause the TV. But then I had to say, okay, then we're not going to watch TV right now because we're not listening, right? So it takes some time for kids to learn what it is that you're expecting. And so don't give it one or two chances and then be like, nope, it didn't work. Keep going, and troubleshoot and problem solve. Like, okay, why is it not working? What can we do differently here? And really rewarding them like, hey, awesome. You guys paused it first time. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And then you get back to your TV. So that's just something to keep in mind as we give these strategies, they may or may not be like immediately effective. You might have to give it a little time.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on another important point here, which is we need to give our child time to actually cooperate and follow through before we tell them again. And I think this is why kids get a lot more commands than we really need to give, is because parents are expecting immediate compliance, immediate listening when we say, put your dish in the sink. And then we restate the command again, but more frustrated before our child really even has the opportunity to process through what you just ask them to do, decide whether they're going to listen or not, and then follow through. So give your child processing time. Practice the pause. After you give a command, pause for a couple seconds, 10 seconds, and give your child the opportunity to actually follow through before you repeat yourself.
Yeah. Kids with ADHD process slower. And it's just something you have to assume, and they're going to need a lot longer time to think about the instruction you gave and initiate that or stop what they're doing and shift their focus to something else. They need a lot more time for that.
Absolutely.
Yes. And like we said, with all of these, just keeping in mind that it is a journey. And so you're not going to be able to implement all of these things on day one. And you might try something and have to tweak it from there. And just know that we are doing it with you, and we are all parenting the same. We're all working so hard to be effective, and build that cooperation, and that relationship is so key and so important to all of us. And in each of our homes, I know that it looks maybe a little bit different, but you are not alone. So our key takeaway for today is that kids with ADHD do better when we use fewer commands, less language, and positive statements, and when we can keep that calm tone of voice. So we would love for you to think about one simple change that you can make to how you give commands today, and just give it a try. See what happens. And don't forget, we are always here to support you. Thanks for listening to Shining with ADHD by your hosts, Lori, Katie, and Mallory of the Childhood Collective. If you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and hit subscribe so you can be the first to know when a new episode airs.
If you are looking for links and resources mentioned in this episode, you can always find those in the show notes. See you next time.